Hello, I'm Crystal.
And I'm Ann.
Welcome to Let's Talk About Faith Stuff.
We are continuing our series about your faith questions.
Last week, we asked the question, what do the different faiths say about animals going to heaven?
Since that conversation, I have been looking at the cats in my life a little differently.
Me too. And we hope that you're having conversations and thinking about your faith questions.
Asking questions encourages us to seek the answers, and that's one way that we can build our faith.
This week's question is going to challenge us, I think.
Okay, let's really talk about faith stuff.
What's the question for this week?
Our question is, how do we as Christians see faith and politics working together? And should there be separation of church and state?
Okay. That's a great question. You know, I happen to know that Albert Einstein once said, those who believe that religion and politics don't mix understand neither. I believe it. I've had people tell me that politics doesn't belong in the church. But in fact, Jesus was a political figure in his time. What do you think, Anne?
Absolutely. He was very political. In fact, he was so political, I would venture to say that his politics got him killed. He was saying things people didn't like.
And have you ever heard of, those little chipmunks? You know what I'm talking about? The ones that sing on TV and stuff, the show. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, like Alvin and...
Yeah, those guys.
Yeah.
So after a while, it really gets to you, right? And it's like, that's the last thing you really want to hear. It just kind of annoys you. It's like a constant scratch, 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 scratch. And I think that was what Jesus was doing. He was constantly banging that gong, talking in the chipmunk voice, however you want to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where the powers that be of the time just said, enough. We've had enough of what you're saying. You're going to cause our system to change, which is really why Jesus was here. To help us.
Yeah. In fact, if we want to follow Jesus, we need to allow our faith to inform our politics. And it's our civic duty to be active in that, I believe.
It is. And when we see something that's wrong, Jesus tasked us with continuing his work here. You know, when we see something that's wrong. We recently had a thing happen in our church where people said that the LGBTQIA inclusion issue was a political one. And it's not. It's a humanitarian and a social issue. And this would have been right where Jesus was, in the middle of all of this. And it's important that we remember that the church has to be at the forefront of these social issues. And I think the Methodist Church has some really good statements about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the official United Methodist stance on LGBTQIA isn't what either one of us believe it should be right now, but they do have some good things to say. In fact, I was reading in our social principles. There's a whole section on the political community, and it talks about, one of the sections is basic freedoms and human rights. And so when we think about treating people with respect and having human rights, a lot of people would say that's a political thing. I don't know that I would, but it's sort of close enough. But I want to read this thing about, I want to read two different things. One is political responsibility, which is kind of what I was saying. The strength of a political system depends on the full and willing participation of its citizens. The church should continually exert a strong ethical influence upon the state, supporting policies and programs deemed to be just and opposing policies and programs that are unjust, which is sort of what you've been talking about. This other one is a little bit longer, the church and state relations. So that goes directly to our church and state question. And I'm not saying that the social principles are the all and end all, but it'll be good to start our conversation about it. The United Methodist Church has for many years supported the separation of church and state. In some parts of the world, this separation has guaranteed the diversity of religious expressions and the freedom to worship God according to each person's conscience. Separation of church and state means no organic communion of the two, but does permit interaction. The state should not use its authority to promote particular religious beliefs, including atheism, nor should it require prayer or worship in public schools, but it should leave students free to practice their own religious convictions. We believe that state should not attempt to control the church, nor should the church seek to dominate the state. The rightful and vital separation of church and state, which has served the cause of religious liberty, should not be misconstrued as the abolition of all religious expression from a public life.
Yeah, and I think that works in theory, but I think that there's a lot to unpack there. And I think one of the things was it was like all about continue to influence. But I can tell you a story. My daughter tried to start a Bible study on her lunch hour when she was in middle school. And she was called out by the staff about not being able to do that because that's not what we do in schools. And I thought, you know what? That immediately took away her freedom.
Yep.
At that point.
I would say that staff person or that school didn't understand what separation of church and state was supposed to mean, because it's supposed to give you religious freedom. You're supposed to be able to practice it. Faith belongs in the public square. It's not separation of church and state doesn't mean you have to do it privately. It just means you can't use your power to force someone into their beliefs, right? It is hard to do that because people misunderstand it. And
that's where Jesus was, in the town squares. That's where John Wesley was, preaching the gospel. Jesus was out there telling people, being that clanging gong, saying, listen, change. God loves you. And change will bring about good things. But people couldn't see that in his time. And I think even now people have a struggle seeing that too.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us today.
We hope you will continue this conversation. This will be a great conversation around the dinner table, I think.
It definitely will. I think it might lead to more questions too. And we want to encourage you to send us those questions. There's an email address in the credits where you can send us your questions, give us feedback, and tell us how your conversations went.
We look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, keep questioning.
See you next time. Bye.